Go ahead and have a seat. So a couple of years ago, my one of my daughters had to do for school a little mini genealogy, a family tree. Had to go back like I want to say 3 or 4 generations. I don't remember exactly, but here's what I know. We ain't going to do the minimum in the Helleman family. And so Dad got into the whole, let's go back and find your family tree thing. I'd never really done that. So I did the whole Ancestry.com and stayed up really late at night following little lines and little connection points. And my poor daughter's like, Dad, we only need to do like 3 of these. I'm like, no, we're not doing 3. We're doing 30, right? Because we can do this. And she finally went to bed and I kept going. And you know, it was one of those just fascinating things. Didn't really change anything about the way I lived my life, didn't change anything about me. Discovered that one of the former governors of Texas, Governor Conley, I'm related to him, didn't know that. Got a great murderer in my family. That was really encouraging. They even wrote a book about him, so that's probably be on a movie of the week one of these days. And that happened a few generations. I actually went back on my father's side to the late 1400s in England. Didn't know as much about my father's side of the family. So it was one of those things just fascinating to learn a little bit, where, you know, the history, where I came from, what was good and bad and everything in between that. And so didn't change the way I lived, just more information. Well, if you look in the Bible, if you ever sort of have skimmed through it and looked, you'll notice that various times there's these like lists of people, okay? And they're really long lists, aren't they? You know, there's one in Genesis. There's a whole book called the Book of Numbers, which is really listing people. It's a great read. Let me tell you, so much fun. And it is in the Bible, so don't call me a heretic. But it's just like it's hard, right? Because you have these long lists of names, and if you've ever sort of maybe tried to read through the Bible or read parts of the Bible, and you get to those lists of names, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but how many of you just sort of skip through those? Like, don't own it. You can own it. It's okay. You're not going. You still go to heaven. Jesus still loves you. It's okay. But it's just like you look at this list and you go, because you don't know most of the names, right? You don't know most of the people. In fact, you know, you'll have a list in the book of Matthew, the genealogy of Jesus. There's only like about 5 or 6 names that most of us would even recognize or know anything about them, and a majority of them are just names. We have no other information about those people other than they appear in these various lists, and we might look at it and go, what's the big deal? Like why are there so many lists of names in the Bible? Why do the Hebrew people seem to care so much about genealogy and where they came from? And really for them, what really mattered was what tribe you were a part of. And so when God came to Abram and changed his name to Abraham, when God came to Abraham and said, hey, I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. If you know the story, Abraham at that time had how many kids? 0, right? And not only did he have no kids, he was sort of past the time of having kids, and his wife was past the time of having kids. It would be ridiculous for them to have a kid, but God goes, I like the ridiculous. And so they end up having a son, and son Isaac, and then Isaac has a son named Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel that would grow into that, and from that one small little family to suddenly thousands and hundreds of thousands and even millions of people. And of all the tribes, probably the most important tribe of the 12 was the tribe of Judah. And here's why the tribe of Judah mattered so much was one that had some people like David in it, like King David. You know, he was the greatest king that the nation of Israel had ever known. But also God promised that the Messiah, the coming Messiah who would save all mankind, would come through the tribe of Judah. So if you weren't a part of that tribe, it did not matter how special you thought your children were. They were never going to be. Your little boy was never going to be the Messiah, no matter what you thought, no matter what you believed about him. If they didn't come from that tribe, that was one of the things that was required. One of the things that God had said for multiple times throughout the Old Testament, that the Messiah is going to come through this one tribe. So if you were to go back and look at the tribe of Judah and go back and look at it, you might expect it to be filled with great godly, amazing people, wouldn't you? You might expect it to be filled with heroes and people who did stuff that just these great men and women of faith. But the truth is, when you go back and look through the tribe of Judah, there are a bunch of wingnuts, like the rest of us are, right? That's a technical theological term, wingnut. They were just ordinary people just like us, who some of them did some crazy things, and you look at it and go, you're telling me that's the family tree of Jesus? You're telling me that's the family that produced, that God chose to work through that family to bring about Jesus? And the whole point being is that the family tree of Jesus looks a lot like your family tree, is a bunch of broken people, but Jesus was perfect. And Jesus was different. And so today, as we're looking and we're going through this series, we're sort of coming to the home stretch on it of stories that they don't teach you in Sunday school, of stories that maybe we don't really focus on because they're a little hard, they make us a little uncomfortable. We're actually going to look at not just the tribe of Judah, but we're going to look at Judah and his boys. This guy, the grandson of Abraham, the guy who would eventually, his descendants would be the most important tribe of all the tribes of the Hebrew people, and we want to look at him and his boys, because he had 3 sons. Okay, it's important to and listen, you got to stay with me because I'm going to try to explain it, but there's a lot going on in this story. So Judah had 3 sons. His oldest son's name was E-R. It's what your son is named when the woman is exhausted after giving birth and the nurse asks the dad, what do you want to name him? And he goes, and that's how he gets, okay, that's not how it happened, but just stay with me, right? The oldest son is The second son, his second-born son, was Onan. His name in Hebrew means barbarian, and it's Conan's cousin, and that's not true at all. So if you quote me on that, you're lying, because I just lied to you. Onan, but his name was Onan, right? Onan is the second son of Judah. The third son was Shelah, which is what you name your son when you wanted a girl, but God surprises you and gives you a son anyway. So the third son, so he has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Those are the 3 sons of Judah that would become, you would think, one of the tribe that would become the great family of that would one day produce the Messiah. Well, Judah's oldest son, marries a woman named Tamar. And they begin their life, they begin their relationship together. There's just one problem. The Bible says, was a wicked man. That's the way God describes him. He wasn't just like a guy who made some mistakes. He wasn't just a guy who, forgot to pick up his socks at the end of the day. No, he was a wicked man. Evil, destructive, hurtful of other people. In fact, the Bible tells us that he was so wicked, so evil, that God said that it would be better for me to take his life than allow him to continue to live, because all he's doing is hurting people. And so God takes Er's life. He dies, not just some random death, not just some accident. No, it says very clearly that God caused him to die. And that was a problem for right? But it was also a problem for Tamar, because in that culture, in that time, women didn't have a lot of rights or opportunities or even ability to sort of control their own life. And so one of the things that meant was that women could not inherit property or money or anything from their husband who died. So the best thing that you wanted was to have a son, and then the son would inherit from the father, and then it was the son's responsibility to take care of his mother. But what happens when you get married and your husband dies and you don't have a son? Well, what God set it up is, and trust me, I'm so thankful this is not the way it works anymore. I'm not saying this is even the best, but it was the reality that they lived in, was that then the second-born son would marry that woman. So what happened was that marries Tamar, dies. So Onan is going to marry Tamar, and then if Onan and Tamar have a son, then what that means is that son inherits what his dad should have had, and he could have taken care of his mom. And so that's what happens, right? Tamar marries Onan, and the Bible continues to describe him as, well, worse than He was evil, and he was destructive, and he was hurtful, and he really did take advantage of Tamar. He used his power to sort of get what he wanted from her without giving her anything, without even trying to treat her kindly, without trying to love her, without trying to provide for her. And so the Bible tells us that because he was so wicked, God said it would be better for him to die than for him to continue to live and hurting people the way that he was. Now, imagine yourself, you're Judah. You had 3 sons. 2 out of 3 sons married the same woman, and 2 out of 3 sons have the same end result. What do you think he's starting to see? What do you think he's starting to think? What do you think because it couldn't be his little baby boys that were the problem, could it? Right? It couldn't be his sons that were causing all of this pain. It couldn't be his little boys that were the bad, that were deserving of what happened to them. No, it had to be. Who do you think he blamed? Right? Who do you think he looked at? It had to be her fault. And so where we're going to pick up the story today is in Genesis chapter 38 and verse 11. And let's see what happens next. And it says, Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. For he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. So here's what happens is that he should have married, or Shelah should have married Tamar, but Judah's like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with that woman. I don't want her around my kids. I don't want my son to marry her, because I'm afraid that if my son marries her, my only son, if he marries her, maybe he's going to end up in the same place she is. So he sends her home and he tells her a lie. He says, look, I need you to go home until he's old enough. He's just not quite ready at this point. So go ahead and go home and wait, and I will tell you when it's time, when he's old enough, when I think he's ready, then I'll let you marry him. But what she quickly figures out, and what's true, is that he has no intention of letting Tamar ever marry his son, which means that she would have no property, she would have no way to take care. She would basically have to live in her father's house until he died, and then after that she had very few options to take care of herself, to provide for herself, and the few options she had, none of them were good options. And so here you have this woman who really has done nothing wrong. Here you have this woman who has done nothing sinful. She has tried to do what's right. She's tried to be faithful even in difficult times. And suddenly she finds herself in a really difficult, a really bad situation. And she's also not a fool. And she knows what's going on, and she knows, and word gets back to her that Judah has no intention of letting his youngest son ever marry her. And so she goes, well, what am I going to do? And she comes up with a plan. I'm not advocating for this plan. I'm just saying this is the plan that she came up with, because here's what she decided to do. She decided to dress like a prostitute, because she heard that Judah was coming to town to do some business. He had some business to do. He owned some property in that town, and so he was coming to town. She heard about it, and in that time, to dress like a prostitute meant you covered yourself from head to toe. You could not, no one would really recognize you, no one would really know who you are, and that was their thought. As long as I don't see you, it doesn't count, right? And again, this is not God honoring, so just understand though that that's what they thought. As long as I don't see your face, as long as I don't know who you are, I can do what I want because it doesn't count. And so she dresses like that, and she waits, and then Judah comes into town and he sees her, and he says, I want your services. There's just one problem. I don't have any money. And look at what happens. And just jump down a few verses, 17. He says, Judah answered as he's talking to Tamar, I will send you a young goat from the flock. That's the price, right? And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So he doesn't have any money, but he's saying, like what can I give you? And she says, well, give me something that will identify you, that everyone knows yours. That way I know you have to pay me. And so in our time, I think it would be like giving our cell phone up. right? And not just a cell phone, but the kind of cell phone that turns on when you put your face in front of it, right? One of my favorite pictures floating around the internet is this police officer, there's a dude's head, and he's putting his phone up to him to unlock it, right? It just makes me laugh. Maybe it shouldn't make me laugh, but don't break the law, and the police officer won't have to do that to you, and everything's good. But he gives it to her because it's like everyone's going to go like, hey, look, you can put it, okay, it opens up. That's your face. That belongs to you, right? You can take this phone and you open it, and you can see that it's mine. It's sort of the equivalent of, he says, give me something that everyone's going to know is mine. And so he has a staff, and on the staff has a little cord that symbolizes family, and he has a ring that was like the ring that symbolized who he was and his family. He says, I'll give that to you until I come back and pay you one day. And they think that the deal is done except for this last little bit of information down here that's pretty important to the story, isn't it? Because not only has this sort of transaction taken place, but it suddenly, Tamar is pregnant, isn't she? And she conceived, and that changes the story. In fact, let's keep reading and jump down a few more verses. It says, about 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. If you want to sort of see the depths and how dark Judah has become and how broken he is, that he looks at this and goes, that's good news. Like in his mind, what's happening here is good news. Tamar is pregnant, which means she's broken her covenant, her commitment, her vows. So that means that I get the opportunity to get out of this so that my youngest son does not ever have to marry her. Yay for me. Look, we're going to just bring her out and burn her to death. You see it, his brokenness, right? Because to him, Tamar was a problem to be solved, not a family to love. Tamar was just a problem that he was just looking for this opportunity, this problem to solve, because she had to be the problem. Again, it could not be him. It could not be his sons. It had to be her. So it's almost like he's thanking God almost that like, yay, she did wrong, so now I can have her put to death and all of my problems are solved. And so he sends some men to basically go arrest her and to bring her so that she can be put to death. And this is where the story gets awesome to me. It says, verse 25 is, she was being brought out. She sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify who these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. How many of you would have liked to have seen the look on his face? I mean, isn't that like, yeah, dude, you just got it right. I mean, it's like, here, come over. Here, let's put the phone in front of your face. Oh, it opened. Who does this belong to, right? That's really what's happening. And you're looking, going, man, you just got caught. And he knows he just got caught. Now, I'm going to give him credit because he owned up to it. I mean, he didn't try to lie more. He didn't try to deceive it. Oh, someone stole it from me or something like that. I mean, he could have done all kinds of things, but he owns it and he confesses at this point after he gets caught, not before. And look, don't judge him because y'all do it too, right? We always tend to confess when we get caught, but he got caught. He confesses it, and it says it goes on. Now, if we had time to read more of the story, we'd see that they have a son, that she has a son, gives birth to a son. His name is Perez, and Perez becomes I'm going to get it right, great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of King David. And so what that means is that the line that produces Jesus, that Jesus comes through Tamar, comes through this sin, comes through this brokenness. And it's not God saying, hey, look, that was a good thing that happened. It is, though, God saying, look, I can be faithful even in the midst of your sin and even in the midst of your brokenness. And I really think that if we look at this story and we ask ourselves, hey, what is God trying to teach us through this? Why did he include this story? Because it's sort of a weird story, and it makes us a little bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? And why is this story so important to us? And one is, I think it does show God's faithfulness to it, but to us and to himself and to his word. But I also think he's showing us that your sin will always catch up with you. And I want to say that because I think most of us would agree, but I don't think most of us live like this. I don't think most of us live with the understanding and acknowledgement that your sin will always catch up with you. That no matter how good we are at hiding, no matter how good we are at covering up, no matter how good we are at convincing ourselves and convincing others that the things that we say, the things that we think, the things that we do are not that big of a deal, and we've all thought and said that, haven't we? That no matter how good we are at hiding it, sin always has a way of growing, of consuming, of destroying, and of catching up with us. And I know that it's easy to look at this story and go, well, look, I'm nowhere near as bad as Judah. Like, I've never done anything quite like that. And you know what? I actually believe you. If you were to say that to me, because I look at what Judah did, I'm going, dude, you are a loser. How can you even, like, what is wrong with you? What were you thinking? And so I think that most of us can convince ourselves that, look, what I'm doing is not as bad as what Judah did. And the truth is, it may not be. The truth is at least may not seem that way. It may just be like this one little thing that I do too much. It may be the pictures that I look at night when no one else is around that I know I shouldn't. It may be the fact that maybe I just spent a little bit more than I should have spent like 10 times this week. It may be just that, hey, I just lost my temper, but doesn't everyone lose their temper from time to time? And we begin to look at our sin and we think, you know, it's not that bad. And I'm not hurting anyone. And I'm not getting caught. And there aren't really any consequences to it. So, Stephen, what's the big deal? Why can't I just do what I want to do? Why can't I just live my life my way? As long as I'm not hurting anyone. As long as I'm not like causing real pain, as long as I'm not like doing any of the really bad stuff like what we just saw Judah doing, why can't I do what I want to do? Why can't I just live my life, hide my sin, pretend like it's a no big deal, explain it away? Well, unfortunately, here's the truth, is that sin grows best in darkness. And so hidden sin, undealt with sin that we don't acknowledge or face up to is always a growing sin. And you've seen it in your life and you've seen it in the life of others where it starts with, I'm just going to do it one time. You ever told yourself that lie? I'm just going to do it one time. Well, okay, I didn't get caught, I didn't get hurt, it sort of felt good, I enjoy it. So, okay, I'm just going to do it one more time. But that's the last time. Right, it's the last time I'm going to do it, just one more time. And then what happens? It grows into, well, I just do it every so often. I just do it every so often. It's not like I do it every day or all the time, but just, every so often. It just makes me feel good. It just is natural. It's just what everyone else is doing. And then it becomes regularly. And then it consumes us. And then it takes over our life. I don't think Judah woke up one day and said, you know what? I'm going to really see how I can hurt Tamar. You actually want to know what happened in Judah's story, and you can go back and read it. You know where his problem began? He married a woman God told him not to. Years earlier, God told him, don't. God told him, that's not my plan for you. But Judah goes, she's pretty. And she makes me feel good. And I like her. And then you know what else happened after that? Instead of raising his sons to honor God, he raised his sons to honor the gods of his wife. And so his sons grew up seeing evil and brokenness and seeing a culture and a world where people hurt each other and took advantage of each other. And so they did what was natural to them rather than following the God of their father. So he just said, you know what? You just do what's easy. And so what ends up happening with Judah is not that he wakes up one day and says, hey, how can I make Tamar's life miserable? He woke up one day and said, I'm going to start ignoring God because I just want to marry the woman that I'm in love with. And God says, there's something better for you. Will you listen to me? Will you follow me? Will you do what I've asked you to do? And it goes and it grows and it becomes this point where Judah finds himself in a really tough spot because his sin has grown. I think this is why we have become so good, so gifted, so passionate about in our culture about doing things like blaming others. It's never my fault, is it? God, do you know what they did? I mean, can't you just like put yourself in Judah's shoes? Can't you see that Judah's saying, well, you know what? I would let her marry Shelah, but she killed my other two boys, and so it's her fault. So I can't let him do what's right because you know what? She'll mess everything up. And what does he do? He blames others. The same way when we do it, like it's my mom didn't do, or my dad didn't do this, or it's the way my boss is, or it's the way that other person is. And so we get really good at blaming others, and we end up just hiding and letting our sin take over. Sometimes we do what he did too, where we explain things away, don't we? Can't you hear him say, look, even as he's negotiating with her, look, I know this isn't right, I know this isn't God's best, but I've got needs that need to be met. I've been away from home for a long time, and so really it's not really like that bad what I'm doing. I just got to meet my needs, and pretty soon it becomes something that's a part of his life and just natural and normal to him because he was explaining it away and making it less of a big deal than it is. Sometimes it's by comparing. I mean, how many of us have thought this week, at least I'm not as bad as... And you get to name the person, right? I'm not going to name them for you. But we think that, don't we? And can't you just see Judah going, well, at least, you know, I'm not as bad as all those people who don't care about their family. At least I care for my family and I want the best for my sons. I mean, can you blame me? I just got to do what's right. I only got one left now anyway. I want to do what's right. At least look how much I love him and care for him. And can't you see him beginning to compare himself to others and go, I'm better than all the others. And here's the thing, right? Here is the thing that we miss, is that we're good at blaming and good at exploring and good at hiding, and all we're doing is allowing sin to grow in our lives. It's not hard to find a reason to do wrong, is it? None of y'all woke up the morning and go, man, I just got to figure out how to do more wrong today. It's easy. And it's easy to come up with reasons. And it's easy to come up with excuses. The problem is it allows sin to grow. And no matter what excuses, no matter what others do, man, it does not make it right. And so here's the good news in this story, though. And I'm telling you, it is good news. Is that while sin, listen, grows in the darkness, light destroys the power of sin in our life. I want to read to you a passage in 1 John. It's a passage I love. It's so powerful. And John says this is the message we have heard from him, from God himself, and proclaim to you that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship, if we say we're in a relationship with him, with God, while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus, is his Son, cleanses us from all sin. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. And I am so thankful John does not stop here, because look at what he says. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. What is God saying? That we don't have to be consumed. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to be ashamed. We don't have to pretend like we're better than we are. We don't have to act like we don't have sin, because guess what we all know? We all know that we're all broken. And every one of us knows it. We may not know the issue, the deal, the specific thing, but we all know that we are all broken, that we all have something in our lives that we wish that we could change, something in our lives that we know is not God's best, something in our lives that is keeping us from being free emotionally and spiritually and in our lives. And you don't have to spend your life looking over your shoulder, worrying that people are going to find out. You don't have to spend your life pretending that you've got it all together. John says, look, just own the fact that you've got some sin in you. Just own the fact that there are things about you that you wish were different. But he says, here's the good news. You can be set free, and all you have to do is confess. Just come to God and say, guess what, God? I'm a sinner and I'm broken. And God's going to go, oh no, I didn't know that about you. Or He's going to say, I've known that before time began, and that's why I sent Jesus to die for you. That's why I sent Jesus for you. He didn't send Jesus to us when we get our act together. He didn't send Jesus to us when we suddenly fixed all of our problems. He sent Jesus. The book of Romans says, while we were still sinners, and we could not do anything for ourselves, God said, that's why I sent my Son to die and to pay for our sins, so you can be set free. And it challenges us. I think what John is saying here is it challenges us to ask, how will you live? Are we going to do what so many of us do, where we hide, where we explain away, where we just live for ourselves? Are we going to live in light or darkness? You see, living in the light means that I am open about and I actually confess my sins. It means that I own who I am. Darkness means that I hide and I hope and pray no one finds out. Are we going to live truth or lies? Are we going to be honest about with ourselves and with others and acknowledge not just my struggles, but acknowledge the fact that the things that sometimes I do are not best for me or not best for others? Or are we just going to live the lie and explain away and pretend like it's no big deal? Are we going to live sacrificial or selfish? Are we going to live realizing sacrificial means that, you know what, I'm going to give my life and give up parts of my life, even though it's maybe what I want or what feels good to me, I'm going to give it up for others? Or are we just going to be selfish, say, I just want to do what I want to do regardless of the consequences? I'm going to ask you a hard question today as we close. And it's not my favorite. I don't like asking things. I don't want to ask it of myself. And it really is simply this, is what sin do you need to deal with? I'm going to ask you not to think about or look at someone else. I'm asking you to look in your life. I'm asking you to look at in the mirror of who you are. Because it's easy to see the sin in others, isn't it? We read this story and we can see everything wrong with Judah very quickly, can't we? It's not hard. I had to write a paper in college about Judah, and it was easy to write a long paper about how messed up this guy is, and you can see it in him. I'm not asking you, listen, I'm not asking you to look at Judah. I'm asking you to look at yourself. I'm not asking you to look at your husband. I'm not asking you to look at your wife. I'm not asking you to look at your kids. I'm not asking you to look at your family. I'm not asking you to look at that person sitting on the other side of the auditorium or that person at work or whatever it is. I'm asking you to look at yourself and say, God, is there anything in my life that I'd be embarrassed if it came out? Is there anything in my life that's keeping me from your best? Is there anything in my life that I pray others don't know about me, because if they knew about me, they might think differently about me? And not that they should, but that's just the way we feel. Is there anything in my life that I need to change? Guys, we spend so much time hiding and covering up and pretending and looking over our shoulder. And God, that's not what God wants for us. God doesn't want us to have these sins in our life that we hide, that grow and consume and take over. Again, maybe I've given some thoughts. Maybe it is what you look at when no one else is looking. Maybe it is the the anger and the emotion that gets out of control in your life. Maybe it is the way you spend and spending too much on the wrong things and not on the right things. Maybe it is something completely different. But what is the thing? What is the sin that you need to deal with? And if you want to, bring it to light. Like, bring it to light for yourself. Confess it with your own mouth before God. But maybe just take it a step further and find someone that you can confess to them. Not because you need their forgiveness, not because they can forgive you. God's the only one who can. But John goes on and tells us to confess our sins to one another. And why does he tell us to do that? Because the moment we confess it, it takes it from being hidden and into the light. And if we really believe that sin grows in darkness and light kills the darkness, then why don't we bring our sin into the light so that we can be set free? And some of us need to just find someone to be honest with. Some of us need to start telling the truth to ourselves and to others and stop making excuses for what we do. You weren't just, it's not someone else's fault. It's not just the way you are. It's not, no, everyone else is doing it. It's not hurting anyone. None of those are all lies. What if we started to tell the truth and stop making excuses and stop explaining away and going, you know what, this thing that I'm doing is evil and destructive and hurtful. What if we started saying, it's not really about me and my life? What if we said, God, remove this, whatever the thing is in your life, so that we could be a blessing to others? Here's the sad thing about Judah's sin, is that it didn't just hurt him, did it? It hurt his children. It hurt Tamar. It hurt countless people. And sometimes we need to realize that and stop believing the lie that my sin's only hurting me. And just say, God, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to change, even if it's hard. Here is the good news, and I'm telling you, it is such good news, and it's simply this, that your sin does not have to define you. God offers you forgiveness and healing and reconciliation. God offers you a new life and a new hope. God says, I will set you free. But that never is going to happen as long as we allow our sin to stay in the darkness. So turn on the light, tell the truth, and say, God, I'll do whatever it takes. And let Him set you free so that we don't have to get to the point of Judah where it's hurting us and hurting others. But we can say, God, I live in your forgiveness and your freedom.